Hey guys, Philip here from Philly 4D Coding, and in this tutorial I am going to show you how to create the URL Shortener microservice project solution from FreeCodeCamp as part of the backend development and APIs course. So I'm going to work through this project from beginning to the end so that you can follow along and see how to complete this entire project. So let's get started. Okay, the first thing that you're going to do, I'm just going to close all this other stuff. Not this. The first thing that you're going to do is create the replit from the boilerplate. So understand what the problem that we're trying to solve is. We're trying to create a URL shortener. What that means is that when we submit a URL, let's say google.com, it creates a short URL, which is just going to be a number. And when you go to, and that short URL, when you go to that short URL here, on the applications route, it'll redirect you to the original URL. Just like that. So that's the idea. And this project definitely takes things a step up from the other two projects because you actually are going to need to store all of the basically key value pairs of the original URLs and the short URLs in a database. That way that when somebody tries to, visit a short URL via GET request, it will know which original URL to redirect them to. And also, if somebody's already submitted a short URL, it's not going to create a URL, it's not going to create a duplicate short URL. Although that also wouldn't be too much of an issue, but probably just good practice not to do that. So that's the idea. So let's get started. All right, so first thing that we're going to need to do is hook up to our database. So you should have already configured a database in the previous lessons as part of this course. So I'm just going to pull up the database here. Oh, okay. It knows me now. And then you just click connect, copy the connection code, and we put that in as a secret here. Call it Mongo URI. Give it the value, put in the password. Mine is ABCD1234, but yours will be whatever you configured your user to be. Okay, and let's just add the code to load in Mongoose and establish a connection. And let's test that out. If everything runs without throwing an error, that means we've connected successfully to our database. All right, so we'll just let that load. And we'll go back here. Okay, don't forget the body parsing middleware, and you can use this function from the DNS. Okay, so we'll need the body parsing middleware, and we'll need the DNS modules. So let's just go ahead and get that taken care of right away. And Replit is being quite slow, but okay. Here's our application. It ran without error, which means we were able to connect to the database. So let's add in the body parser and the middleware. And the DNS module as well, which we're going to use. Okay, the first thing is the short URL route, and we're going to need to be able to post to it and give back a response with the original and short URL. So this is going to be a post route, and it's going to be short URL. And let's actually first just log what the request looks like, so that we can properly handle it. Okay. Okay, so it looks like this URL with what we submitted in the form. Okay, so let's grab that URL. Okay. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to actually validate that that URL is a valid URL. So in order to do that, we're going to use the URL built-in module. And what the URL module does is when you pass in a URL, it'll be able to construct a URL object. However, if the URL is not valid, it'll throw an error. So we can validate. We try to create a new URL, and if it fails, we can just return the error. Simple enough. Okay, now, just because the URL comes in a valid format doesn't mean that the actual domain exists. So that's where we're going to need to also do a DNS lookup, which it told us to do here. Okay, and the callback function comes in this format. So what actually happens is if the domain actually exists, it's going to return the address. So let me show that to you now. And before we do this, actually, let's just log this URL object to see what it looks like. So let's give that a go. Okay, here's our URL object. You can see that it was created properly, and it looks like this. And so the actual domain that we want is this one here, google.com. The protocol is here, but we actually want the host name when we look up the DNS. So we want the URL object.hostname. And let us also take a look at what happens. Yeah, so we're gonna log what happens, and we also want to check that we throw an error when we give it an invalid URL. So let's check that part first. Okay, that looks good. And when we give it a valid URL, we get the URL object, and we also get the address that's associated with that domain. Okay, perfect. Now, if the domain doesn't exist, this address is going to be false. So if we don't get an address, then that means that if the DNS domain does not exist, no address returned. Then we return our error as before. Okay, so otherwise we have a valid URL with an associated domain. So from here we can proceed. So from here we can proceed. First of all, whatever object that we create is going to have to have an original URL and a short URL. So let's just do an example. Right now, the original URL is equal to the href, and the short URL, let's just assign it to 1, and let's return that. And sorry, we want to call this, let's do that. So before we start updating the database, let's just make sure everything is looking how it should look. Okay, good. Now we want to store this in the database, because then when we do a GET request with this short URL, we're going to need to have these mapped. We're going to need to have this stored somewhere. So first thing is, let's create a schema. We'll call this the schema for the URLs, and it's going to have 2 values, the original URL and the short URL. And the original URL is going to be a string, and it's required, and we want to make sure that it's unique. The short URL is also going to be a string, it's required, and it's unique. Why is it showing me red here? Did I do something wrong? I don't think so. Let's just proceed with this. Okay, and we'll create a model to work with that schema. Okay, I think that's good here. Let's make sure that runs without errors. We don't need this statement anymore. And we're gonna want to create let new URL equal to new URL model, and the original URL is going to be this, and the short URL is going to be that. And then we're going to save this. Okay, I think that's good. I hope that's good. Let's give it a try. And actually, let's do this. Response object is equal to that, because we're also going to want to return this. So we're going to want to save this, and then we're going to want to return this object as well. Okay. Create an entry in the database. Unexpected. Okay. So let's give that a try. And there's an error. Okay, that worked. Did it save in the database? Yes, I would think that it did. Okay, now that that's in the database, when we should also be able to do a GET request to that short URL, and it should and redirect to that original URL. So let's just make sure that we're able to, yeah, let's just make sure that we're able to capture the short URL from here. We'll just say success. Okay, so now if we go to a short URL of 1, okay, we got the short URL here, and now we want to find that short URL in the database. So we'll use the find method. We're going to look it up by short URL. And then let's do find 1, because we only want 1. We're going to, it's a function of the found URL. Want to redirect. Okay, we're going to want to get the original URL. And we're going to want to redirect the user there. And if we can't find that short URL, we'll say otherwise it does not exist. Okay, probably add an if statement that says if we found the URL, then we do this, and if we didn't find it. Okay, let's add some comments here. Find the original URL from the database. And okay, if we didn't find it, then we'll give that error message. Okay, I think we're good. I think a curly bracket. Oh, perfect. It redirected us to Google as we wanted. Okay, now the next thing we want to do is we can't be assigning everything a short URL of 1 because that's already taken. So what we actually will need to do is assign the next short URL. So we want to get the latest short URL and then increment it by 1. So our short URL is not actually going to be 1 anymore. We're going to have to get the latest short URL. So again, we're going to find 1 as we did before. And just going to do an empty search, but we're going to sort it by short URL, descending. We're going to get just the top result, and then, and sorry, this is just called the URL model. Function of the latest URL, and first of all, we want to make sure that we get the latest URL. Okay, we want to make sure that we got the latest URL. Otherwise, we can just let the short URL be equal to 1. Then only if we get the latest URL, then we can do, we're going to get the latest URL, we're going to get that URL, we're going to get the short URL value, and I'm going to add 1 to it. That's going to be the last short URL incremented by 1. Now we can do the code that we were going to do here. And do that. Okay, so let's give that a go with a new URL and make sure that that works. So let's do a completely new one. So .com. Okay, and we got a short URL of 11. Uh-oh. Okay, so this should actually be an integer. That's why that happened. So yeah, let's try that again. Okay, looks like it worked. Let's try and go there now, and we're good. Need to see my Facebook. Okay, that all looks good. Now the only other thing we need to add here, this is enough to, complete the project and pass all of the tests. However, if the URL already exists, if we've already put a short URL in the database for it, we don't need to actually create a new short URL and put it in the database. We should actually try and find that URL first before we do any of this. So before we start building the URL and putting it in the database, let's actually check that it doesn't exist. So okay. Sorry, this is a little bit messy here, but okay. So if we found the URL, then we don't need to do any of this, and we can just go, we can just return the original short URL that we already have stored in the database. Okay. Otherwise, we proceed with doing everything else that we had here. Let's fix the spacing here. Everything should be working. All right, that's perfect. And let's try one more new website. Okay, and if we try that again, All right, and if we do this, okay, everything seems to be working now. Let's make sure that we've passed all the tests, which we have. Okay, so first thing is when we post a URL, we first validate it by trying to create the URL object, and if the URL is not valid, then we return an error. Then we validate that the DNS domain exists. And only if there's no address, then it's again an invalid URL. Otherwise, we're at the step where we have a valid URL. So we grab that URL, we check that it doesn't exist in the database already. If it does exist in the database, we don't need to do anything except return a response that we get from fetching that short URL. Otherwise, we're going to need to add it to the database. And in order to do that, we're going to need to assign a new unique short URL that we don't already have. So in that case, we find the latest short URL by sorting by latest short URL. Then we add one to it, and we return that new short URL with the original URL, and we save it to the database. Now, to actually handle the redirects from our short URLs, when somebody makes a GET request and provides a short URL, we find the short URL in the database. Then we get the original URL associated with that short URL, and then we just do a redirect. And that's the solution to the URL shortener microservice. Hope that you found that helpful. I found this to be a very interesting, somewhat challenging, but pretty cool and useful microservice project. And I had fun doing it. I hope that you learned something watching this, and that this walkthrough was helpful. And if you liked the video, then please give it a like and subscribe to see more videos like this.